Okay, so first of all, let me apologize for not being there. I guess if you're sick, and there's not much you can do about it. So today, we're going to do some vocabulary for Lord of the Flies. I'm going to introduce you to sentence patterns. We're going to do a quick activity having to do with survival and choosing survivors if you had a plane crash. And then you will kind of write a plan for if you were going to take that plane crash survivor list and turn it into a paragraph. So the first thing is I'm going to hand out a reading list that has basically your calendar of reading for you to do for Lord of the Flies. So make sure that you get that from your substitute and just kind of check it over. It's actually got some quizzes on it that are scheduled, and it tells you what the writing assignments are going to be. The first vocabulary word. So you should be in your daily warm-up book, and you should be in the vocabulary section on page 100. Make sure you put the definition and the sample sentences if there are any. Anachronism is a thing belonging or appropriate to a period other than that in which it exists, especially a thing that is conspicuously old-fashioned. I put the word anachronistic right there too because it's another form. It's the adjective form of the word. So when you look at this picture of Abraham Lincoln, it looks very normal, except that he's got a laptop sitting in front of him. And that would be anachronism because it's not in the right time period. Over here on the other cartoon, here's a man who's inventing the wheel, and the person says, "Do you have a license for that, sir?" Well, obviously, licenses came at a totally different time period. So anachronism is when something isn't in the time period for which it belongs, which is kind of why we're studying time periods. You're going to want to stop the video and copy all these definitions down, but I'm just going to go through them at my own pace. So stop the video, copy the definitions down. Contrite, a feeling of pain or sorrow. The man felt contrite after he hit the pedestrian. It's an adjective. It's a feeling of grief or sorrow. All of these vocabulary words are in your Google Classroom in the Lord of the Flies folder. There's also a website where you can practice the words. You can take quizzes over the words. You can get flashcards, whatever you need to do. I am really just picking out those words that I know you're going to need to know for the test. Ebullience is the next one. It means eager enjoyment, bubbliness, exuberance, being full of energy. It's also a noun. You can use it as an adjective if you make it ebullient. Jackie could not contain her ebullience when she struck out to the top of the lineup. She knew they could win the game. So it describes a person who is just full of energy, like that rush of energy you feel when you've won something or you've done a really great job of something. And the last word is effulgence. It's the quality of being bright and sending out rays of light. So the glare of the sun off of the water was a threatening effulgence. And it kind of is just like anytime when there's like this really bright sunlight that is shining down. After you have copied down all of those vocabulary words into the vocabulary, and make sure that you're writing those sample sentences down. Because when you take the test, you're going to be allowed to use your definitions that are in your daily warm-up book, but you will not be able to use the online resources. So you're going to want to make sure that you have these few words that I'm selecting in the definitions and the sentences so that you can kind of recognize how they're being used. Okay, so now you're going to move to the sentence and parts of speech section of your daily warm-up book. That's on page 90. So sentences come in very predictable patterns. There's actually 10 patterns, but 5 of them are used a lot. So we're really just going to focus on those 5 most common sentence patterns. They're like mathematical formulas, and they really depend on the verb. There's 2 kinds of verbs, action or linking, so you have to pay close attention to the kind of verb. Go ahead and write down all of the notes that you see on the slide as I go over them, and stop the slide if you need to take some time to finish before you move on. So the first kind of sentence pattern has action verbs. In fact, all 3 of the first kinds have action verbs. So there's a subject plus an action verb plus something other than an object. So not a direct object, not an indirect object. It might be a prepositional phrase, it might be an adverb, but it's something other than what we call a direct object. So for example, after you've written these 2 sentences down, you would say, okay, what is the subject of this sentence? The raft. And what did it do? It tipped. And then that's going to be your action verb. Well, other than this adverb, there isn't anything receiving the action of that action verb. The action just kind of stops in the sentence. Same thing here. You've got bike, and the bike fell, but you don't have any nouns or pronouns that are receiving the action. You've got a prepositional phrase and another prepositional phrase, but those are not considered to be direct objects or the recipients of the action. The next sentence pattern, number 2, also has an action verb, except this one has a noun or a pronoun which is receiving the action. We call that, so go ahead and copy this down right underneath the first pattern. We call that noun or pronoun that is receiving the action of an action verb the direct object, or for short, it's called a DO. Okay, so what you've got is the dog. What did the dog do? It bit. And then you have to ask yourself, who or what did it bite? If you have an answer to that question after you've said the action verb, then that is going to be your direct object. In this case, the man bit, or the dog bit the man. That's called a direct object. So that's the second sentence pattern. The third sentence pattern also has to do with action verbs. But in this case, we have added another element, and this one's called an indirect object. So IO is indirect and DO is direct. And this is how you do that one. You find your subject, the girl. You find your verb, gave. You ask yourself who or what. The girl gave what? She gave a present. And then you ask yourself to whom or to what. And if you have an answer to that, then you know you're looking at a direct object. So who did she give the present to? The man. An indirect object always has to be a noun or pronoun that comes in between the verb and the direct object. If you look at this example down here, you have the girl, and she gave a present. So the girl gave what? A present. But because to the man is actually a prepositional phrase, it is not an indirect object. They can only be one or the other. They can't be both. They're either prepositional phrases, or they're subjects, or they're direct objects, or they're indirect objects. And once you can define these different jobs that nouns do, it helps you figure out how the sentence is put together. So what you're going to do now is go to the packet that your substitute should have handed out to you that says sentence pattern number 1, number 2, etc. And you're going to do the sentences that your substitute tells you to do. They're highlighted. Go over the answers. Make sure that you understand why they fit that particular pattern, and you can talk about them. If you're not sure you're getting this, you're going to want to do the whole packet, then check the answer key that I have stapled out on the bulletin board the next day, and then if you have any questions, come and see me, because you're going to be taking the test pretty soon, and you want to make sure you get clarification from me before you do that. Okay, the last 2 sentence patterns have linking verbs. So number 4 is a subject, a linking verb, and a predicate noun. And the way this looks like, it's kind of like a teeter-totter. If you remember the old teeter-totters that you used to have before they got outlawed. Okay, the teeter-totter had a fulcrum in the middle, and it went up and down. They were equal sizes, equal balanced. That's what linking verbs do. They link the subject that is on one side to something else that is on the other side, in this case, a predicate noun. So you have the man is my uncle. It's a noun or a pronoun, and that is the exact same thing as the man. They represent the same exact person. I could actually switch it around and say, my uncle is the man. Just like you could spin your teeter-totter around and it would still do the exact same thing. That's called sentence pattern number 4, and it has a predicate noun. And the last sentence pattern also has a linking verb, but it has an adjective at the end of it instead of a noun. So you have the man, and you still have a linking verb, and you look on that green piece of paper that I gave you with all the parts of speech, and then this way it's connected to, that linking verb is connecting it to an adjective. That adjective is describing the subject. Now, why do you care about this stuff? Because we have to learn about subjective and objective pronouns. And nouns are always replaced by pronouns. So what happens is, if you can recognize the jobs that the nouns do, whether they are subjective nouns, and subjects and predicate nouns are both subjective nouns, or if they're objective nouns, like number 2, number 3, and number 4, that helps you replace the noun with the right word. So for example, let me just show you. If you came into my room and you said, Mrs. Rodina, have you seen my books? And I said, I don't know. Are those they? And I pointed to a group of books that were on the desk. You'd be like, what? But that is actually how you would do that. You would say, are those books on the desk they? Because they is the subjective form of the pronoun that would replace those. You're going to be tested on this in the ACT, so you need to understand that there are two different kinds of pronouns that go in two different kinds of places, depending on what the noun is that they are replacing them. In addition to the fact that it's always kind of nice to talk correct grammar. So what would happen is, you would circle your nouns in a sentence, and then you would say, okay, are there any prepositional phrases that I recognize? In the middle of the desert, with ebullience. And then of those words remaining, a strange-looking man was lighting the fire. Which one's the subject? Which one's the verb? That verb is action. Do I have a direct object, an indirect object, or another preposition? And in this case, you have a direct object. Same thing in this sentence, except now you only have a linking verb. So you've got this whole prepositional phrase. You've got your two lovers. Were feeling, but it's not action. Contrite actually makes them feel guilty, so now they have a predicate adjective. Once you can recognize those patterns, then it will help you be able to go to more difficult sentences where you have very bizarre-looking subjects that are now going to be replacing those one-word subjects. So it gets a lot more complicated once we start doing the phrases, so you need to have these patterns down before then. Go ahead and stop and do the last two sections, sentence pattern number 4 and sentence number 5 in the packet. Double check the sentences that are highlighted, see if you have any questions. If you are having problems, you need to take that packet home and go do it, and then check the answers when I come back to school the next day. Here again, I'll be more than happy to try and go over this stuff with you if you're having problems. You just need to come and see me at some point, Thursday or Friday.